They saw a man in a hoodie and a little girl with a messy afro. They saw economy class. They saw targets. But what the head flight attendant didn't see was the name on the manifest, a name that owned the very tarmac she was standing on. She didn't just kick a child out of the way. She kicked a hornet's nest that would sting the entire aviation industry. Within 3 hours, 151 airports would go dark. Thousands of planes would be grounded, and one arrogant crew member would wish she had never boarded that flight. This is the story of how one kick cost the world billions. The rain lashed against the reinforced glass of JFK's Terminal 4, blurring the lights of the runway into streaky, weeping watercolors. Inside, the air was recycled and tense, filled with the restless hum of delayed passengers. Henry Thomas adjusted the hood of his faded charcoal sweatshirt. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who had worked a double shift at a warehouse, though he had done that in his youth, but the tired of a man who had spent the last 48 hours negotiating a hostile takeover of a logistics conglomerate in Tokyo. He hadn't slept. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he was holding the hand of his 7-year-old daughter, Maya. Maya was clutching Mr. Buttons, a stuffed rabbit that had lost an ear 3 years ago and had been loved into a state of grey matted fur. She was humming a quiet tune, oblivious to the stares they were receiving. "Daddy, are we sitting in the big seats today?" Maya whispered, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Henry squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, baby girl, the big seats, just like I promised. You're going to sleep all the way to London." They approached the gate for Aura Airlines Flight 882. Aura was the gold standard of luxury travel, or at least that's what their marketing claimed. Their slogan, "Ascend above the ordinary," was plastered on every screen. At the podium stood Beatrice Halloway. Beatrice was not just a flight attendant. She was the senior purser, a woman who wore her uniform like a suit of armor. Her lipstick was a violent shade of red, her blonde hair was lacquered into an immovable helmet, and her eyes scanned the line of passengers like a predator looking for the weak. She prided herself on keeping her cabin pristine. To Beatrice, first class was a country club, and she was the bouncer. When Henry and Maya stepped up to the priority lane, Beatrice didn't look at their boarding passes. She looked at Henry's sneakers scuffed Nikes. She looked at his hoodie. She looked at Maya's wild, uncombed curls and the raggedy rabbit. "Sir," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet venom, "the line for economy is to the left. Zone 4 hasn't been called yet." Henry didn't blink. He was used to this. In fact, he usually found it amusing, a secret test of character that most people failed. He simply held out his phone, displaying the QR codes. "We're in 1A and 1B, Henry said, his voice deep and calm. "Priority boarding." Beatrice scoffed, a sharp, audible sound that made the businessman behind Henry check his watch impatiently. She snatched the phone from Henry's hand, her long, manicured nails clicking against the screen. She scanned it. The machine beeped green. Valid. But Beatrice wasn't satisfied. "There must be a system error," she muttered mostly to herself, but loud enough for the people nearby to hear. She looked at Henry with narrowed eyes. "These tickets are full fare first class, purchased 3 hours ago. Walk-up rate." "Is there a problem?" Henry asked. "The problem," Beatrice said, leaning over the podium, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was far more insulting than a shout, "is that we have a strict dress code for our premium cabin, sir. And frankly, we also scrutinize last-minute purchases made with questionable credit cards." Henry took a slow breath. He could have told her that he didn't use a credit card. He could have told her that the transaction was a direct debit from a holding company that likely insured the very aircraft she was scheduled to fly on. But Henry Thomas, the CEO of Thomas & Co., the man who quietly owned the ground handling contracts for 60% of the Western Hemisphere's airports, didn't like to flex. He liked to give people rope. "My card is fine," Henry said, "and I checked your policy. There is no dress code for paying passengers, only for employees traveling non-rev. We are boarding." He reached for his phone. Beatrice pulled it back. "Don't snatch at me," she snapped. The veneer of customer service vanished. "Stand aside. I need to verify this with the gate agent. You're holding up the line for the actual priority passengers." She gestured for the man behind Henry, a white man in a bespoke suit, to come forward. "Right this way, Mr. Henderson. So sorry for the delay." Henry stepped back, his jaw tightening. Maya looked up, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She hugged Mr. Buttons tighter. "Daddy, is the lady mad at us?" "No, Maya." Henry said, his voice hard. "She's just confused." 20 minutes later, they were finally allowed on the plane. Beatrice had found no reason to deny them, much to her visible fury. The gate agent had whispered that the payment was cleared and verified by the bank, leaving Beatrice with no ammunition other than her own prejudice. As Henry and Maya walked down the jet bridge, Beatrice was waiting at the aircraft door, greeting passengers. When she saw them, her smile inverted. "Seats 1A and 1B, she said tightly, pointing a sharp finger. "Do keep your belongings out of the aisle. The first-class cabin is for relaxation, not for a playground." Henry ignored her, lifting Maya into the massive leather seat of 1B. He stowed their small carry-ons and settled in. He took out his laptop, a custom-built, unlabeled black machine that controlled an empire. The flight boarded. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Beatrice made a show of serving champagne to Mr. Henderson in 1C and the couple in 2A, purposefully bypassing Henry and Maya. When Henry asked for water for his daughter, Beatrice said, "We'll begin service after takeoff, sir. I'm busy." Maya was tired. She was 7. The excitement of the big seat was wearing off, replaced by the crankiness of fatigue. She was playing with Mr. Buttons, making the rabbit hop along the armrest. "Vroom, vroom," she whispered. Suddenly the rabbit slipped from her small fingers. It tumbled off the armrest and landed in the aisle just as Beatrice was storming past to secure the cabin for pushback. Beatrice didn't stop. She didn't step over it. With a look of pure disdain, she swung her foot. It wasn't an accidental stumble. It was a calculated, forceful kick. Her heavy heel connected with the stuffed rabbit, sending it skidding under the seat across the aisle, gathering dust and dirt. "Keep your trash secured," Beatrice barked, looming over Maya. But in her follow-through, her shoe had clipped Maya's shin. It wasn't a bone-breaking blow, but it was a hard, sharp impact from a hard-soled shoe against a child's leg. Maya gasped the air leaving her lungs, and then let out a piercing wail. "Daddy, she kicked me. She kicked Mr. Buttons and she kicked me." The silence in the first-class cabin shattered. Henry unbuckled his seatbelt in less than a second. He was out of his seat, towering over the aisle. He was 6'4", a former linebacker, before he became a business tycoon. "You touched my daughter," Henry said. His voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, like an earthquake before the ground splits. It was the voice of a man who could end worlds. "You kicked my child." Beatrice took a step back, realizing the size of the man she had provoked. But she doubled down her arrogance, acting as a shield. "Sit down, sir. That is a federal offense. You are interfering with a flight crew member." The child threw the toy in my path. I tripped. You didn't trip, said Mr. Henderson from seat 1C. He lowered his newspaper. I saw it. You kicked the toy, and you kicked the girl. Mind your business, sir, Beatrice shrieked. She grabbed the interphone handset on the wall. Captain, we have a level 3 threat in the cabin assault. A passenger is aggressive. I need security immediately. Henry knelt down to check Maya's leg. There was already a red mark forming on her shin. He picked up the dirty rabbit and handed it to her, whispering soothing words. Daddy, she sobbed. It's okay, baby. It's okay. Henry stood up. He looked at Beatrice, who was now trembling with a mix of adrenaline and rage. You're done, Henry said simply. You're off this flight. Or I am. Oh, you're certainly off this flight, Beatrice sneered, regaining her confidence, as she saw 2 Port Authority police officers coming down the jet bridge. And you're going to jail. The scene was humiliating. 2 officers marched onto the plane. Beatrice played the victim perfectly, squeezing out fake tears, pointing a trembling finger at Henry. He lunged at me. He threatened to kill me. The child was running wild, and when I asked them to settle down, he went crazy. That's a lie, Mr. Henderson said again. But the police weren't listening to witnesses yet. They were listening to the flight crew, who held the ultimate authority in the sky. Sir, grab your bags, now, the officer ordered Henry. My daughter is injured, Henry said, pointing to Maya's leg. She kicked her. We can discuss that on the jet bridge. Right now, you are disrupting a federal flight. Let's go. Henry looked at the officer, then at Beatrice, who was smirking behind a tissue. He realized that arguing here in a metal tube was a losing battle. He needed to be on his own turf. He picked up Maya, who was still crying softly. He grabbed his laptop. He grabbed the bag. Do you know who I am? Henry asked Beatrice one last time. It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine question. I don't care who you are, Beatrice spat. You're just another thug in a hoodie who thought he could buy class. Get off my plane. Henry nodded slowly. He looked at her name tag. Beatrice Halloway. Okay, Henry said. Remember that. You didn't care. He walked off the plane. As they stood in the jet bridge, the officers began to lecture him, but Henry ignored them. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the police station. He dialed a number that only 12 people in the world had. This is Henry Thomas, he said into the phone. The voice on the other end answered immediately. Mr. Thomas, we weren't expecting a call. Is everything all right with the Tokyo acquisition? Forget Tokyo, Henry said. His voice was cold, precise, and terrifyingly calm. I am currently at JFK. I have just been removed from Aura Airlines Flight 882. The purser assaulted my daughter. There was a silence on the line. Then assaulted, sir. Kicked her, then had me removed. Listen to me very carefully, Jonathan. I want the kill switch initiated for Aura Airlines. Immediate effect. Sir, the assistant's voice wavered. The kill switch that covers the fuel logistics, the ground handling, and the de-icing contracts for the entire Northeast Alliance. If we pull that, that's not just one plane. I know what it is, Henry interrupted. I want their credit lines for fuel frozen. I want our ground crews ordered to stop servicing Aura planes immediately. I want the gate leases we underwrite at JFK Heathrow and LAX put into default for breach of conduct clauses. And I want it done in the next 10 minutes. Mr. Thomas, that will shut down everything. It will affect 151 airports where we manage their logistics. Henry looked through the window of the jet bridge. He could see Beatrice Halloway inside the plane, laughing with the co-pilot, mimicking Henry's height, mocking him. 151 airports, Henry repeated. Do it. Shut it all down. He hung up the phone and looked at the police officer. Am I under arrest? Henry asked. We're detaining you for questioning, the officer said, though he looked less sure of himself now having heard the tone of the conversation. Fine, Henry said. He sat down on a bench in the terminal holding area, placing Maya on his lap. You can detain me, but I suggest you look at the departure board. It's about to get very interesting. The holding room at the Port Authority precinct in Terminal 4 was a sterile box of beige walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Henry sat on a hard plastic chair, his posture unnaturally straight, his face a mask of stone. Maya had finally cried herself to sleep, her head resting heavily on his thigh, the dirty one-eared rabbit clutched loosely in her hand. Officer Miller, the younger of the two policemen who had escorted them off the plane, sat across from Henry, typing slowly on a battered laptop. He looked up occasionally, eyeing the man in the hoodie. Something wasn't adding up. Usually people dragged off planes for aggression were drunk, loud, or still shouting profanities. Henry was none of those things. He was terrifyingly quiet. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that Officer Miller mistook for a cheap knockoff with a rhythmic precision. You have family coming to get you? Miller asked, breaking the silence. Or a lawyer? Neither. Henry said softly, careful not to wake Maya. I'm just waiting for the phone to ring. You only get one call, buddy. You already made it. I didn't call a lawyer, Henry replied, his eyes drifting to the clock on the wall. I called the future. Meanwhile, 300 yards away on the tarmac, Flight 882 was sealed. Beatrice Halloway was in the forward galley humming to herself as she stowed the champagne flutes. She felt a rush of adrenaline, the specific toxic high of a petty tyrant who had successfully exercised power. She had cleaned her cabin. The riffraff was gone. The atmosphere was restored to the exclusive club she believed she presided over. Cabin is secure, Captain, she buzzed into the interphone. Ready for pushback. Copy that, Beatrice, Captain Vance replied. Thanks for handling that situation. We're running 20 late, but we'll make it up in the air. The captain toggled his radio to the ground frequency. Below the nose of the massive Boeing 777, a yellow pushback tug was clamped to the front landing gear. Inside the tug sat Sal, a 50-year-old veteran of the tarmac who worked for Apex Ground Services. Ground to cockpit, Sal's voice crackled in the captain's headset. Go ahead, ground. Brakes released. Cleared to push. There was a pause, a long, static-filled silence that stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. Ground, Captain Vance repeated. Do you copy? We are cleared for push. Down on the tarmac, Sal was staring at the ruggedized tablet mounted on his dashboard. It had been displaying the flight plan and the push sequence. But suddenly the screen had flashed a violent, blinking red. Critical alert code, Omega. Source, Thomas Global Holdings. Directive, cease all operations immediately. Target, Aura Airlines. All assets. Action, disengage and hold. Sal blinked. He had worked on the tarmac for 30 years. He had seen snowstorms, hurricanes, and security lockdowns. He had never seen a code Omega. He didn't even know that code existed. But he knew who signed his paychecks. Thomas Global had acquired Apex Ground Services 2 years ago. The memo had been clear. Directives from the parent company supersede all airline client requests. Sal looked up at the underbelly of the multi-million-dollar jet. He looked at the passengers in the windows. Then he looked at the blinking red screen. Cockpit, this is ground, Sal said, his voice confused but firm. Negative on the push, Captain. Say again, ground. The captain's voice was sharp. We have the slot. What's the hold-up? I can't push you, Cap. I've got a stop order. A stop order from ATC. No, from my dispatch. My system just locked out. It's telling me to disconnect. Disconnect? What are you talking about? We are blocked out. We need to move. I can't move you, sir. If I move this tug, I lose my pension. I'm unhooking. Inside the cabin, the passengers felt the subtle clunk of the tow bar dropping. Then they heard the whine of the tug's engine as it backed away, leaving the massive plane stranded 10 feet from the gate, too far to use the jet bridge, but not on the taxiway. Just sitting there. Limbo. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Vance's voice came over the PA, sounding annoyed. We're having a slight miscommunication with the ground crew. We'll get this sorted in a jiffy. Beatrice peered out the porthole window of the aircraft door. She saw the yellow tug driving away. Then she saw the baggage carts, which were supposed to be loading the final containers, stop dead. The drivers looked at their handheld devices, turned their vehicles around, and drove off in a uniform line, like a retreating army. "What is going on?" she whispered. And then the power cut. The plane had been relying on the ground power unit GPU, a thick black cable connected to the airport's grid to run the air conditioning and lights while the engines were off. Suddenly, the hum of the air vents died. The bright cabin lights flickered and went out, replaced by dim emergency lighting. The silence was absolute. "Captain!" Beatrice grabbed the phone. "We just lost power. The AC is off." "I know, Beatrice," the captain snapped. "The GPU just got pulled. Literally. Someone just yanked the cord from the terminal. I'm trying to start the APU auxiliary power unit, but—" The captain paused, flipping switches. "That's strange. What? The fuel pressure. We were supposed to be topped off. The gauges are reading bare minimum reserves. We don't have enough fuel to run the APU for more than an hour without cutting into our flight reserves." The plane sat on the concrete. The sun was beating down on the aluminum fuselage. Without the air conditioning, a plane full of 300 people begins to heat up within minutes. The air grew heavy and still. Beatrice felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back beneath her polyester uniform. She looked at Mr. Henderson in seat 1C. He was fanning himself with the safety card, looking irritated. "Stewardess," he called out, omitting her title. "It's getting stifling in here. I'd like another champagne while we wait." Beatrice forced a smile, but her hands were shaking. I'm afraid the catering service hasn't restocked the ice, sir. And with the power out, the chillers are off." "Well, fix it," he snapped. She couldn't. Nobody could, because outside on the sprawling concrete sea of JFK, everything marked with the Aura Airlines logo was becoming an island. The fuel trucks drove past them to service Delta and British Airways. The baggage handlers ignored them. The mechanics who were usually on standby were nowhere to be seen. It wasn't just Flight 882. Across the tarmac at Gate 42, an Aura flight to Miami was abandoned mid-loading. At Gate 12, an Aura flight from Paris had landed, but had no one to guide it into the bay. It sat on the taxiway, blocking traffic, its passengers trapped. The silence of the tugs was spreading like a virus. 4,000 miles away in the glass-walled headquarters of Aura Airlines in London. It was 2:00 a.m. The Operations Control Center, OCC, was usually a quiet place at this hour, manned by a skeleton crew monitoring the transatlantic red-eyes. Elias Thorne, the VP of Operations, was pouring himself a coffee when the first phone rang. Then the second, then the third. Within 2 minutes, The big board, a massive digital map of the world showing every Aura flight, began to bleed. Green icons. On time turned yellow delayed. Then one by one, they turned red grounded critical. "What is happening?" Thorne barked, slamming his mug down. "Is it a weather system? A terror threat?" "No, sir," a junior analyst shouted, her voice trembling. It's the vendors, all of them." "Which vendors?" "Ground handling, fuel, de-icing, catering. In New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Toronto, Miami. Sir, it's 151 airports. They've all issued a service stop order simultaneously." "That's impossible," Thorne said, rushing to the main console. "We have contracts, rigid multi-year contracts. Get Apex Services on the phone. Get Global Fuel on the line." "We tried, sir. They're not answering." "Who is answering?" "The automated system." The analyst said, her face pale. "It just says, account suspended due to Directive 1A from Parent Holding." "Who is the Parent Holding?" Thorne demanded. He knew the vendors, but he didn't track the corporate ownership structures of the service companies. They were just subcontractors. The analyst typed furiously. "It looks like a conglomerate called Thomas Global. They acquired the majority stake in the North American ground logistics sector last year. It was a silent takeover." Thorne froze. The name hung in the air like suck. Thomas. "Check the passenger manifests," Thorne whispered. A cold dread was pooling in his stomach. "Check the incidents log for the last 4 hours. Did we have any VIPs? Any disputes?" "Checking." The analyst scrolled through the logs. "Nothing major. Just a standard removal at JFK. Flight 882. A disruptive passenger in first class. Assault on a crew member. Name, Henry Thomas. Traveling with a minor, Maya Thomas." The room went so quiet, you could hear the hum of the servers. Elias Thorne felt his knees give way. He grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. He didn't just see a passenger removal. He saw the end of his career. He saw the stock price plummeting to zero. He saw the bankruptcy lawyers circling. "We kicked Henry Thomas off a plane." Thorne's voice was a strangled squeak. "The man who owns the fuel we burn. The man who owns the stairs we walk on." The report says the purser Beatrice Halloway initiated the removal. She claimed he was aggressive. Police were involved. Thorne grabbed the red phone, the direct line to the CEO, who was currently asleep in his penthouse in Kensington. "Wake him up," Thorne ordered, "and tell him to pray." Back at JFK, the situation inside Flight 882 had deteriorated from uncomfortable to dangerous. The temperature in the cabin had reached 85 degrees. Babies were crying. The air was stale and thick with the smell of perspiration and anxiety. Beatrice Halloway was no longer smug. Her hair was frizzy, clinging to her damp forehead. Her pristine uniform was stained with sweat. She was currently being screamed at by 5 different passengers in first class. "Let us off this plane!" Mr. Henderson shouted, his face purple. "This is kidnapping! We're trying!" Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking. "The jet bridge won't move. The stairs won't come." She had tried to open the cabin door to get fresh air, but without the stairs or the bridge positioned correctly, it was a 20-foot drop to the concrete. The safety strap was across the door, but the open air was teasing them. Below on the tarmac, she saw a black SUV pull up. It wasn't a police car. It was a sleek, armored Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows. A man in a sharp suit got out. He wasn't airport security. He looked like corporate legal counsel. He walked right past the police cars and headed toward the terminal building. Inside the terminal holding room, the door opened. Officer Miller looked up, annoyed. "Hey, this is a restricted area." The man in the suit walked right past Miller and stopped in front of Henry. He bowed his head slightly. "Mr. Thomas," the man said, "I'm Jonathan's proxy here in New York. The car is outside. We have a private charter prepped at Teterboro. We can have you in London in 6 hours." Henry didn't move. He gently stroked Maya's hair. She stirred, waking up. "Is the message received?" Henry asked quietly. "Loud and clear, sir. Aura Airlines has currently grounded 400 flights. Their stock has dropped 12% in after-hours trading. Their CEO is trying to reach you." Officer Miller stood up, his mouth open. He looked at the thug in the hoodie, then at the expensive suit, then back at the hoodie. "Wait, who are you?" Henry finally stood up. He picked up Maya, who rubbed her eyes and clutched her dirty rabbit. "I'm the guy who pays the rent," Henry said to the officer. He turned to the man in the suit. "I don't want to go to London yet. I want to go back to the gate. I want to watch. Sir, my daughter was humiliated," Henry said, his voice dropping to that dangerous rumble again. "I want to see them beg." "Understood, sir." The man in the suit turned to Officer Miller. "We are leaving. Unless you plan to charge Mr. Thomas with a crime, I have the district attorney on the other line, and he's very curious why the city's largest infrastructure investor is being held in a break room." Officer Miller swallowed hard. No charges. You're free to go." Henry walked out of the holding room, carrying Maya. He didn't run. He walked with the heavy, inevitable pace of a glacier. He headed back toward Gate 4, where the massive glass windows looked out onto the stranded, sweltering metal tube of Flight 882. He stood by the window. Inside the plane, he could see faces pressed against the glass, desperate and sweating. He could see Beatrice Halloway running up and down the aisle, panic etched into every movement. Maya looked out the window. "Daddy, why aren't they moving?" "Because they were mean, baby," Henry said. "And sometimes when people are mean, the world stops helping them." "Are we going on the plane?" "No. We're going to take a different plane, a better one." Behind Henry, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the terminal. It was the station manager for Aura Airlines at JFK. A woman named Karen, followed by 3 frantic-looking supervisors. They had seen the manifesto. They had received the call from London. They were sprinting toward Henry like their lives depended on it. Because they did. Karen skidded to a halt, breathless, her face flushed with terror. She saw the man in the hoodie. She saw the child. She saw the rabbit. "Mr. Thomas," she gasped, doubling over. "Mr. Thomas, please." "We didn't know. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." Henry turned slowly. He looked at her with eyes that held zero sympathy. "It wasn't a mistake," Henry said. "It was a choice. Your employee made a choice. Now I'm making mine." The air in Terminal 4 was usually a generic blend of floor wax and duty-free perfume. But around Gate 4, it tasted of fear. Karen, the station manager, held her phone out like an offering to an angry god. Her hand was trembling so violently that the screen auto-rotated back and forth. On the line was Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Aura Airlines, calling from London. He had been screaming for 5 minutes, but now he was listening. Henry didn't take the phone immediately. He looked at Maya, who was sitting on the edge of a window ledge, swinging her legs. The bruise on her shin was darkening a purple crescent moon against her brown skin. She was eating a bag of pretzels that the man in the suit, Henry's fixer, whose name was Elias, had produced from nowhere. Mr. Thomas, Karen whispered, her voice cracking. Please, it's the CEO. He says he'll do anything. Henry looked at the phone, then at Karen. You're asking me to negotiate with a man who is 4,000 miles away, while the woman who hurt my child is 50 feet away. She's still on board. We can't get her off until the bridge connects, and the bridge won't connect because your system has locked out the hydraulics. Henry nodded slowly. That sounds like a dilemma. He finally took the phone. He didn't put it to his ear. He put it on speaker and held it flat in his palm. This is Thomas, he said. The volume of his voice was low, conversational. Mr. Thomas. Arthur Pendleton's voice boomed, tinny and distorted. Good God, man, we are bleeding out here. Do you have any idea what you've done? The global financial markets are reacting. We have halted trading. This is corporate sabotage. Mr. Pendleton, Henry interrupted, his tone as dry as sand. Do you know what the market cap of Thomas Global is? Silence on the line. It's roughly 10 times the size of Aura Airlines. Henry answered his own question. I don't care about your stock price, Arthur. I can buy your entire fleet with the cash I have in my liquidity accounts and turn your planes into soda cans. What I care about is the culture you allow to fester in your cabins. This is about one flight attendant, Pendleton asked, incredulous. One bad apple will fire her. Consider it done. Just turn the fuel back on. It's not about one apple, Arthur. It's about the tree. Your golden standard is a lie. Your senior purser looked at a black man in a hoodie and a child with natural hair, and she decided we were trash. She decided she could physically assault a child because she felt entitled, unchecked, superior. Henry looked out the window at the plane. The windows were fogging up from the humidity inside. I want her to understand, Henry said. I don't want a letter from HR. I don't want a settlement check. I want her to stand in front of me, in front of my daughter, and I want her to understand exactly who she kicked. I want her to realize that the trash she tried to sweep away owns the ground she stands on. Fine, Pendleton shouted. I'll order the captain to march her off right now. Just unlock the gate. I'll unlock gate 4, Henry said. Just gate 4. The other 150 airports stay dark until I'm satisfied. He hung up and handed the phone back to Karen. He nodded to Elias. Elias tapped a command into his tablet. Outside, with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like a dying breath, the jet bridge for Gate 4 shuddered to life. The yellow accordion tunnel began to extend, inching toward the trapped aircraft will yield to lead. Inside Flight 882, the atmosphere had descended into a primitive state of anarchy. It was 100 degrees in the cabin. The emergency lights cast long, ghostly shadows. The air was heavy with the smell of 300 people sweating in panic. Beatrice Halloway was backed into the corner of the forward galley. Her immaculate appearance had disintegrated. Her blonde helmet of hair was plastered to her skull. Her red lipstick was smudged. Her uniform blouse was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing flushed, blotchy skin. She wasn't just hot. She was terrified. Mr. Henderson, the man in seat 1C, who she had tried so hard to impress, was currently standing in the aisle leading a chant. Open the door! Open the door! We're trying, Beatrice screamed back. Her voice shrill and hysterical. The captain is trying. You did this, a woman from row 2 shouted, pointing a finger at Beatrice. We all saw it. You kicked that little girl. You're the reason we're cooking in here." "I didn't. It was an accident," Beatrice lied, but the lie felt thin and brittle in her mouth. The cockpit door flew open. Captain Vance stepped out. He wasn't wearing his hat. His tie was loosened. He looked furious. He didn't look at the passengers. He looked straight at Beatrice. "Grab your bag," Vance said. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Captain," Beatrice stammered, Are we deplaning?" "The bridge is connecting," Vance said. "But the order came from London. You are deplaning. The rest of us are waiting until you are off this aircraft." "What, you can't send me out there alone?" "There are police, that man. That thug." Vance stepped closer, invading her personal space. "That thug just shut down our entire global network, Beatrice. That thug is Henry Thomas. He owns Apex. He owns Global Fuel. He owns the lease on this gate. You didn't just kick a passenger. You kicked the landlord." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Her stomach dropped, a sensation of vertigo worse than any turbulence she had ever experienced. Thomas. The name rang a bell now. The logistics magnate. The invisible billionaire. I didn't know," she whispered. "That's the problem," Vance spat. "You treated him like dirt because you didn't know he had money. If you were a decent human being, it wouldn't have mattered who he was." A heavy thud echoed through the fuselage. The jet bridge had connected. The captain turned to the cabin door. He cracked it open. The rush of cool, conditioned air from the terminal didn't reach them yet, but the sound of the world outside did. "Out," Vance ordered. "Captain, please." Beatrice begged, tears finally spilling over. Not fake tears this time, but tears of genuine, crushing fear. "He'll destroy me." "You destroyed yourself," Vance said. "Now go, before I throw you out myself." Beatrice Halloway grabbed her purse. She stepped through the doorway, her legs trembling so hard she could barely walk. She moved down the narrow-ribbed tunnel of the jet bridge. It felt like walking down the throat of a beast. The incline was steep. The lights in the bridge were harsh. She reached the top of the ramp. The glass doors to the terminal slid open. There was no crowd of paparazzi. There was no news crew. There was just a row of silent, staring faces. The passengers in the terminal who had been delayed were watching. The airline staff were watching. And in the center of the gate area, sitting on a simple bench, was the man in the charcoal hoodie. He didn't look like a thug anymore. In the stillness of the moment, he looked regal. He sat with his legs crossed, one hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the little girl with the afro. Maya was holding the rabbit that Beatrice had kicked. Beatrice stopped. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Security had formed a perimeter, not to arrest her, but to ensure she didn't leave until the interaction was over. Henry stood up. He rose slowly, unfolding his height until he loomed over the space. He didn't yell. He didn't advance on her. He just waited. Karen, the station manager, nudged Beatrice forward. "Go," she hissed. "Apologize. Fix this." Beatrice took 3 shaky steps. She felt small. She felt exposed. For the first time in her career, the uniform didn't give her power. It made her a target. "Mr. Thomas," Beatrice began, her voice a pathetic croak. I am so sorry. It was a terrible misunderstanding. I was stressed. I didn't mean to." Henry raised a hand. Silence fell instantly. "Stop," Henry said. Don't lie to me, and don't apologize to me." He looked down at Maya. "Apologize to her." Beatrice looked down at the child. Maya looked back, her eyes wide and innocent, confused by the lady who had been so mean and was now shaking like a leaf. Beatrice swallowed her pride. It tasted like ash. She slowly lowered herself. She bent her knees, sinking down until she was eye level with the 7-year-old girl. It was the most difficult physical movement of her life. "I'm sorry," Beatrice whispered to Maya. "I'm sorry I kicked your bunny, and I'm sorry I hurt your leg." Maya looked at her father, seeking permission. Henry gave a small nod. Maya held out the rabbit. "His name is Mr. Buttons," she said softly. "He has an ouchie now." Beatrice stared at the raggedy toy. I see that." "You shouldn't kick things," Maya said, with the devastating, simple logic of a child. "It's mean." "Yes," Beatrice choked out. "It is mean." Henry stepped forward then. He leaned down, his face inches from Beatrice's ear. "You are going to walk out of this airport," Henry murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "You will never work in aviation again. I will make sure that every airline, every charter service, every ground crew knows your name. You judged us by our clothes. Now the world will judge you by your character." He straightened up and looked at Karen. "Get her out of my sight," Henry said, "and tell London they can have their fuel back." He picked up his bag. He took Maya's hand. "Come on, baby girl," he said, turning his back on the weeping flight attendant. "Let's go find a plane that deserves us." Beatrice Halloway did not look back as she walked away from Gate 4. There was no defiance left in her stride, only the heavy, dragging shuffle of the defeated. She passed the rows of passengers she had sneered at earlier. The backpackers, the families with crying babies, the people in tracksuits. They didn't jeer at her. They didn't scream. They simply watched her with a mixture of pity and disgust, parting like the Red Sea, to let her pass not out of respect, but to avoid touching the woman who had become a pariah in the span of an hour. As she reached the exit doors, she saw her crew badge reflected in the glass. With a trembling hand, she unclipped it and dropped it into a trash can. She knew with absolute certainty that she would never wear it again. Back at the gate, Henry watched her disappear. He didn't smile. Revenge, he found, didn't taste sweet. It tasted like necessary medicine, bitter, harsh, but essential to cure the infection. He pulled out his phone and typed a single word to his operations center: "Resume." The effect was instantaneous. It started as a low rumble, a vibration that could be felt through the floor of the terminal. Then came the sound, the roar of engines spooling up. On the tarmac below, the yellow tugs that had been frozen like statues suddenly roared to life. The fuel trucks engaged their gears. The baggage carts began to weave through the labyrinth of aircraft. It was as if a spell had been broken. The blood of the airport began to flow again. "Daddy, look," Maya pointed out the window. "The trucks are moving." "Yeah, baby," Henry said, lifting her onto his hip. "They were just taking a nap, but it's time to wake up now." Elias, the fixer in the suit, stepped forward. "The Gulfstream is waiting at the FBO, sir. The car is curbside." They walked out of the terminal, not through the jet bridge, but through a private service exit opened by the terrified station manager. A black town car was waiting on the tarmac, engines running. As they drove away from the commercial terminal, Henry looked back at the Aura Airlines plane Flight 882. It was finally pushing back 2 hours late. He imagined the atmosphere inside, the hushed whispers, the nervous flight attendants, the passengers realizing they had witnessed a collision between arrogance and an immovable object. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the private aviation terminal. There were no lines here, no metal detectors, no judgmental pursers. The pilot of the Gulfstream G650 stood at the bottom of the stairs, smiling genuinely. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thomas, and this must be Miss Meyer." Meyer hid her face in Henry's neck, shy. "We have a special guest on board for you, Meyer," the pilot said, winking. They climbed the stairs. The interior of the jet was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut. But Meyer didn't care about the decor. She cared about what was sitting on the large divan, a massive basket filled with chocolate coloring books and a brand new giant plush rabbit with long floppy ears. Meyer gasped. She wiggled out of Henry's arms and ran to the basket. "Is this for me?" she squealed. "All for you," Henry said, collapsing into the seat across from her. He finally let out a long, exhausted breath. As the jet taxied to the runway, bypassing the line of commercial planes, waiting for takeoff, Henry opened his laptop. The news was already breaking. CNBC Aura Airlines. Stock plummets. 18%. Amidst logistics blackout. Twitter #boycott. Aura trending worldwide. Bloomberg. The Thomas Doctrine, how one billionaire just reminded the world who really runs the economy. Henry closed the laptop. He didn't care about the news cycle. He cared about the fact that his daughter was currently giggling, drawing a picture of a bunny flying a plane. The jet accelerated the G-force, pushing them gently back into the soft leather. They climbed steeply, piercing the cloud layer that had hung over New York all day. Suddenly, the cabin was flooded with brilliant golden sunlight. "Look, Daddy," Meyer whispered, pressing her nose against the window. "We're above the rain." "We are," Henry said, reaching over to stroke her hair. "We're always going to be above the rain, Meyer. I promise." 3 months later. The fallout was nuclear. Aura Airlines didn't go bankrupt, but they came close. The Thomas incident, as it was taught in business schools, forced the board to resign. The CEO, Arthur Pendleton, was ousted in a vote of no confidence. The airline spent $50 million on a rebranding campaign focused on inclusivity and respect, but the stain remained. They had to slash ticket prices to fill seats. The gold standard was tarnished forever. As for Beatrice Halloway, her name had been quietly added to the do not hire lists of every major airline and hospitality group. The industry is small and memories are long. Henry heard a rumor months later from one of his logistics managers. Beatrice was working at a toll booth on the New Jersey Turnpike. It was a job where she sat in a box taking money from strangers, watching cars go places she couldn't follow. One rainy Tuesday, a black limousine rolled up to her booth. Beatrice, wearing a generic grey uniform, slid the window open. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, the blonde dye growing out. $6, she said robotically, not looking at the driver. The window of the limo rolled down. It wasn't Henry. It was Elias, the man in the suit. He didn't say a word. He simply handed her a crisp $20 bill. "Keep the change," Elias said. Beatrice froze. She recognized him. Her eyes went wide, darting to the tinted back window of the limo. She couldn't see who was inside, but she knew. Beatrice started, her voice shaking. The window rolled up. The limo drove away, disappearing into the rain, leaving Beatrice holding the money, standing in the exhaust fumes of the life she used to think she was too good for. In the back of the car, Henry didn't look back. He was reading a storybook to Maya. And then, Henry read softly, the rabbit hopped all the way to the moon, where nobody could ever kick him again. The end, Maya whispered, drifting to sleep. The end, Henry agreed. Henry Thomas proved that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be rude. It just needs to exist. Beatrice Halloway learned the hard way that when you kick the person you think is beneath you, you might just be kicking the pillar that holds up your entire world. She lost her career, her status, and her pride, all because she couldn't see the humanity behind a hoodie. Wow, that is a level of karma that you almost never see. It really makes you think about how we treat strangers, right? You never know who you're talking to or who they might be. What would you have done if you were in Henry's shoes? Would you have accepted the apology, or would you have shut down the airport just like he did? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Type karma if you think Beatrice got what she deserved. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story about justice served cold. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind to everyone. You never know who's holding the keys to the kingdom.